Hello everybody, my name's James, and for the benefit of those listening on the audio, you're listening to Ask James, my YouTube live stream where I welcome questions from the YouTube community on anything football related. I'll be here hopefully for the next hour or so answering questions, be it on fantasy, just general football. I'll be catching up with the YouTube community. It's been a while since I did one of these streams, so apologies for those who've been on YouTube waiting for me to start. Just to timestamp this for the benefit of those on the audio. It's just gone 12 p.m. UK time on Friday, July the 7th. I've not got anything particularly that I want to cover off right at the start, so I'll get straight into the questions. Here's an interesting one. Tiffy Ferrero says, why can't I see Tariq Lamptey, Van Heck and Abdul Baba, Ethan Ampadu on FPL price list when I sort it team-wise with Brighton and Chelsea? I have absolutely no idea, Tiffy. Apologies. Bloomer Caldera says, is Clayton Fernandes cousin of Bruno Fernandes and is he from Portugal or India? Oh my God, I don't actually know where Clayton's heritage is actually. But as far as I know, he's just British. But he's definitely not cousin of Bruno Fernandes. I don't think he's Portuguese. Nico is. I don't think Clayton is. It's so bad. I don't even know. Damien Rozalski says, what is your FPL team ID? I don't know specifically, but I can say that it's 8,000 and something. But exactly, I don't know. I'm not hiding that. I generally don't know. I did it. I had a look. It was 8,000. 8465, something like that. I have no idea. But it's definitely in the 8,000s. Jasim Jazz says, hi James, good morning. Your prediction on top 4 and bottom 3. So at the moment, the bookies would have it, obviously City as champions, with probably a slight favouritism for Arsenal over Liverpool for second, and then Manchester United fourth ahead of Newcastle. I'm probably inclined to agree with that. It's not anything against Newcastle, a little bit like I explained on the transfer window podcast yesterday, that it's a new season for Newcastle with Champions League, etc., and that adds a little bit of unpredictability. Plus they've got a tough start, then better fixtures, but Champions League starts up, so I still think Newcastle will be close. Chelsea will obviously improve. We wouldn't rule Tottenham, Villa or Brighton out at this stage, I don't think. But yeah, I think top 4, probably City, Arsenal, Liverpool, United would be the most likely. In terms of bottom 3, it's going to be very tough for Luton and Sheffield United. So Luton are not going to spend big because their priority is to stabilise the future of the football club and obviously invest in the stadium in terms of a new stadium as well. Sheffield United, there's no takeover yet, so there was even rumours of administration back towards the start of the year, so I'm not sure how much Prince Abdullah is going to be willing to put into the football club at the moment when it seems he's keen to sell. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a takeover of Sheffield United that took place during the course of the season, to be totally honest with you. The third one is it's up for grabs, isn't it? I think Burnley will be okay. I think they'll do fine, to be totally honest. But I think for particularly Everton and Nottingham Forest, it's going to be a very, very and actually not Nottingham Forest so much. Everton and Wolves are the two that I'm concerned about. I mean, they've both got good managers. Sean Dyche knows how to keep a club up in the Premier League. And I think Julian Lopetegui is obviously a very experienced manager for Wolves as well. But I'm concerned what's happening in the background with Wolves. Again, as discussed yesterday. Why is Suj messaging me saying, can we do a podcast at 1 o'clock? No, that's not ideal, boss. All right, might have to cut this a little bit short. Wolves are not looking like they're going to be spending money on players. It looks like Max Kilman may have been offered a new deal, since we mentioned yesterday that he may well end up departing because there was a serious offer on the table from Napoli, for his services. Everton are also not going to spend big. As I said, I think Burnley will be okay. It's going to be difficult for Forest and Bournemouth. They've both got really difficult starts. If you ask me to pin me down right now, I'd arguably say Wolves, subject to what they do in the transfer window. in the next month or so, and I've lost my feed on YouTube, which is not handy at all, but I do have it on my phone. Roseanne Fleur says, hi James, have you seen the videos sold on social media by Nottingham Forest striker Hwang Ui-jo? I've never heard of him. I don't even know if he is a Nottingham Forest striker. I have no idea who that is. Louis says, normal life is restored with Planet FPL back. What team other than Spurs are you most excited to watch next season? Other than my own, Brighton, same as. So I guess I'm quite interested to see what Vincent Kompany's doing and going to do with Burnley, but Brighton's the one for me, and it'll probably be a little bit easier now. Many of you who listened to me throughout last season will know I perhaps had a somewhat unhealthy obsession with De Zerbi and wanting him to come to Tottenham, which now we have a new manager I don't have to think about so much anymore, so I can just enjoy watching Brighton. I think De Zerbi is absolutely destined for the very top of football. I wouldn't be surprised, for example, if he eventually took over from Pep Guardiola, for example. So Brighton is the answer. Quite annoyingly for me, although it's not affecting you, because I can see on YouTube that everything's running fine. In front of me on the laptop, everything's gone down, unfortunately, so I am working off my phone, unfortunately. Alfredo Demetrius says, why is Steve of Elite FPL criticised you on his YouTube video for influencing people in forming the template for game week 1? It's up to Steve. I got a lot of love for Steve and a massive respect for him. He's a lovely bloke. He came on our 24-hour live stream when we did it, so I'm alright. I'm here to be criticised, but I wouldn't say that I haven't heard it, so I can't really respond to it. So I don't think it's fair for me to throw any criticism back. But all respect to Steve-O, people don't have to agree with me anyway. So what I would say is it's probably it's probably not me that's the biggest influence on influencing a template. Probably be other people, wouldn't it? Have got a lot more followers and subscribers than myself. So, but it's okay. I'm here to be criticised. Javier Alcantara says, is it an absolute must, bro, to wildcard very late, like game week 19 this season? Definitely not. No, there'll be many different ways to do it. I think for those who are looking perhaps quite heavy on Arsenal and Manchester City for the start, their fixture run's really good for the first 7 as a cluster. So that probably means you're not doing it probably till sort of game week 8 at the earliest when they play each other. But no, not at all. There'll be certainly people who will, perhaps if the template doesn't bang early on, there'll perhaps be a surge for a lot of people to wildcard around about game week 3. There's another little period, sort of game week 10, 11, where there's a few other teams, like Brighton come back into a good run, Crystal Palace, West Ham, Burnley, who we may not have huge interest in those 3 teams before, certainly now at this point of the season, who may well come of interest. But there is a swing very late on, around about sort of game week 16 or so. I think it's Manchester City, Chelsea, Tottenham, Newcastle come into better runs. Arsenal, Liverpool come into a difficult one, and it's not great for Manchester United either. So that might be the sort of one that creates it. But I think probably for most people, they're probably not planning an early wild card, is what I'd say. And I guess, like I said, if people are thinking of going really heavy on Arsenal and Manchester City particularly, then I can't see the need to warrant to wild card early, because, and I've lost the live chat on my phone now as well. What is going on? It's a disaster. Welcome back. I can't see the need for people to doing it. What are you going to do if you're sitting there with 6 Arsenal and 6 Man City and you've had a difficult start and you've had a bad game week 1 and 2, and then suddenly game week 3 City's coming into Sheffield United and Arsenal got Fulham at home? Like I can't see people pulling the trigger for the sake of changing perhaps 5 of their weaker players in the team. I just don't see that, in all honesty. Callum Odumbelli says, do you expect Callum Cisse of Tottenham to be involved in the first team lineup of Ange Postecoglou? No, as far as I'm aware, he's been released. I think defensive player Sierra Leone international, has had a couple of caps for them, but I don't think he's, I might stand corrected, I don't think he's a Tottenham player anymore. So to follow up on your question, why have FPL not listed him on a price list, that's why. But there's a lot of other academy players, even if he'd stayed at the club, would have been well ahead of him anyway. So, and they've not been listed. Lombardetto says, name the enabling 4.5 million mids and forwards in FPL who will play 70-90 minutes in a game. Probably the most likely as a midfielder at the moment, I would have thought, is probably Boubacar Traore of Wolves in midfield, who's 4.5. With Neves and Matinho gone, they've obviously signed him permanently. That's the one permanent signing that Wolves have made in this window so far. So I would have thought if you had to have one, well, I think most are heading towards 5 in midfield. Boubacar Traore at 4.5 would be the one that if I had to do it right now. Up front, depends, right? And I think it's probably a wider conversation anyway to throw in the 4.0 defenders as well at this point and say, like, don't stress at it at the moment. If I had to pick right now, it'd probably be Cauley Woodrow of Luton. We'll probably get some minutes as a 4.5 forward. But something might emerge, like Florian Balogun moves on loan to another Premier League team. That's your guy. Tore it up in Ligue 1 last year. He's obviously on the books at Arsenal. If he goes on loan somewhere, that's your guy. Don't stress about it. Similarly, people talking about Baldock and Bayer right now and Bell at Luton. Yeah, sure, fine. Discussion. But there's so many 4.0 defenders, if they get a move, will be more interesting. So, perfect example would be Jed Spence at Tottenham. If Jed Spence goes to Crystal Palace on loan, hypothetically, who may be looking for a new right back, that's your 4.0 defender. And there's loads of other alternative options like that as well. So, I certainly wouldn't worry about those positions too much at the moment. Andre Traore says, why are Wolves not giving my brother Adama Traore a new contract? Because they spent all their money on Boubacar Traore, mate. Christian Prefer says, hi bro, I have Haaland, Salah, Trent, Kane and Saka in my current draft, but my defence and other players are bad, like 4.5 or 5 million. Yeah, that's what's going to happen to you, basically. Laxman Shivaraja, sorry if I mispronounced that, says, are you going to mute FPL accounts on Twitter until game week 1? Which drags you in creating a similar template to theirs? No, I mean, look, for me, because of the volume of content I put out, I won't have time to listen or watch much else, for example. Even if I muted accounts, I'm still going to see the ownership, etc. in FPL. So when I look at the sites, it's difficult to avoid. And I think, to be honest, from a content creation perspective, I wouldn't want to avoid those percentages and understanding the ownership. So I've said anyway that I think I would highly likely to probably end up with a template anyway because of whatever would happen pricing. And the pricing, I would say, for particularly the kind of top mid midfielders, means obviously there's a lot of choice. But I mean, for me, I don't need to see that Haaland's ownership's going to be around 80% to know that I'm having him, right? For me, as I said in pre-season, if he'd have come in at 16 million, I'm starting with him. It makes no relevance. So I have an understanding of what I want to do. I will not let myself be influenced, hopefully, by seeing things on Twitter. And to be honest, the way I use Twitter now, I create lists. And to be honest, I'm more looking for information and news than screenshots of FPL teams of other people. I try not to overly look too much, to be totally honest. But it's fair comment. I know there's a few others doing that. I don't think it's the worst idea. But for me and the amount of content there is, there's no point in me avoiding it. Bakaya Sequoid says, can you create a new head-to-head league in FPL only for YouTube people who watch your videos? There's no intention to do that, to be totally honest, mate. Holostamos says, early opinion on Tottenham defence. Could it be worth having them in FPL since they are all except Porro, 4.5 million? Yeah, the one I think to really keep an eye on in pre-season would be Destiny Uzoji, who some of you will be familiar with, but many of you won't, who Tottenham bought last summer, but obviously spent the season on loan at Udinese. He's a 4.5 defender. He's a left back. It's probably quite dependent in terms of if Tottenham are looking to use him as an overlapping fullback, or someone more likely is going to come into inverted position, but then can come on the underlap potentially from that position, which I've highlighted on the Talking Tactics I'm going to release for advanced tier patrons later today. I think he's the one to watch for, but you're looking at that from an offensive perspective. I think when you look at the first two, Brentford away and Manchester United at home, I don't see clean sheets particularly. I think if you listen to Ange Postecoglou speak, you'll get a real quick understanding that this guy really wants to play front foot football and is more interested in what his team does with the ball in terms of their creation. So I think Tottenham will be far more adventurous this season. I certainly don't think we'll concede the volume of goals we conceded last year, which was in the 60s, but I don't think we're suddenly going to become watertight anyway either. So I think Udogie and Porro would be the two if it looks like they're going to play. There's no guarantee of that, by the way, because it might be he wants to use Emerson Royal inverted or Ben Davies inverted. Maybe Jed Spence can either get a run potentially. But it's Porro and Udogie. If it looks promising for one of them in pre-season, then sure, let's have a look. But I would think you're probably better off having a watching brief and waiting, unless you watch all of Tottenham's friendlies and have a real certain understanding. But I'll give you an example. Last year, I absolutely thought that Doherty would start the season and Perisic would be the two wing-backs game week 1, and kind of came to light the day before that wasn't going to be the starting choice. It was going to be Emerson Royal and Ryan Sessegnon. So, but I get a sense of understanding that he'll want to implement his methods quite quickly, Postecoglou. So I can answer that question a lot better in 3 or 4 weeks. My instinct would be no. I certainly haven't gone, oh my God. But Udogie is the one who, again, a lot of people may be very unfamiliar with, who could become quite interesting quite quickly at 4.5. I know there's a lot of people, oh yeah, Sven Botman's locked in at 4.5. But if someone like that shows true potential from a defensive perspective, 4.5, it's more exciting, isn't it? And let's be honest, Newcastle's first 4 is obviously very, very tough as well. Lewis Stapleton says, is there a room to rent in your house or neighbourhood? It's definitely not in my house, mate. In my neighbourhood, yeah, sure, there's probably loads. This is my current landlord is going to increase my rent by extra £300 next month. I'm very sorry to hear that, mate, but it's not going to be particularly cheap where I live, which still kind of falls within London. Rima Rodri says, yeah, rent prices have gone up in London. Yeah, there you go. Matthew Halliday. Hi, James. Do you think Spurs are a void in game weeks 1 and 2? No, I've just spoken about the defensive stuff. The offensive guys, no. So, I mean, one of the things I'd like to do, and I can't promise that I'll do this, but one of the things I'd like to do is have players at different price points. So, to give you that as an example, as a midfield 5, so perhaps like Rashford at 9, Saka 8.5, maybe Martinelli 8, Foden 7.5, and Mitoma at 6.5. Have them at different price points. So one of the things I've early been thinking about is Rashford or Son, and I'm very tempted by the idea of Heung-min Son, but I need to see this from Tottenham in terms of where he's going to play in the pre-season friendlies, and that could even be heavily influenced by the future of Harry Kane, which I think we'll find out a lot more on next week. So the likes of Son and Maddison, and even to a certain extent Kane. I mean, what if Haaland got injured? Do we want to start with Kane? Possibly we do, right? So I wouldn't rule these people out of our thoughts if obviously Harry Kane stays. So no, the offensive players, though, the main trio, I wouldn't say Kulusevski. There's only 0.5 difference between Kulusevski and Maddison. So I think you pay the extra for Maddison. But no, the main trio, and even Richarlison, if Kane left, obviously Richarlison's a 7 million midfielder. They could all be under consideration from an offensive perspective. So no, I wouldn't say hard avoid. And also, Tottenham come into a decent set of fixtures: Bournemouth away, Burnley away, Sheffield United at home between 3 and 5. Then there's a couple of really difficult ones: Arsenal, Liverpool 6 and 7. But when it comes to game week 3, I think it's worth considering that eyes and focus may well be on Chelsea, for example, who then themselves come into Luton at home, Forest at home, Bournemouth away. And you possibly slightly argue that maybe Chelsea's first 2 is a little bit harder than Tottenham's, although they're very similar, to be honest. But I think with the attacking players at Tottenham, probably better understanding of what we're going to get than Chelsea to start with. So I think a lot of people are looking at Chelsea at the moment, and clearly the likes of James, Chilwell and Kunku, maybe even Jackson, Raheem Sterling, all under consideration. I guess there's an influence on me being a Tottenham fan, knowing what I'm going to say. Whereas with Chelsea, there might be more of a watch and wait brief, perhaps. I see people more wanting to buy Chelsea in game week 3 than Tottenham in game week 3. Let me put it that way, perhaps. Adam Hanny says, hi James, Havertz versus Maddison, discuss. I haven't got the information on either. Like, is Maddison going to play in right half space, left half space? That's quite important, actually. I did a piece this morning on how Tottenham might really struggle to press from their right hand side if Maddison plays in the right half space rather than the left. I think that's important to understand how that might happen. And similarly, obviously, Kai Havertz's positioning is really important. It's quite an assumption at the moment he's probably going to take over Granit Xhaka's role, but it might be even more advanced than obviously what Xhaka played. It might mean Odegaard slightly withdrawn. Hopefully we'll get some of these answers during the summer. If I had to punt one right now without the knowledge, I'd go with the fixtures at the start, so it would be Havertz for me. Keith Hill says, who's the captain game week 2 if no Salah? Haaland. Sorry, it's boring, but the way they've done the pricing just means we did a piece on Monday looking at taking on Haaland, and we identified 2 real opportunities in the first 7 game weeks, which was at Salah obviously against Bournemouth in game week 2, and perhaps Harry Kane if he stays against Sheffield United in game week 5 as the real to take Haaland on, who plays Newcastle at home and West Ham away respectively in those 2 weeks. But to be honest, just captain Haaland. It's not even a discussion. I might take my top captaincy picks off the deadline stream because I'm not sure there'd be any point. That would be it for me. If I just go Haaland as one premium, just captain Haaland for the first 7 weeks, unless something drastically really changes in the situation. So we're going to fear captain Haaland at home to Newcastle. Of course, another alternative would be Trent, a different Liverpool attacker, a Diaz, a Gakpo, a Núñez, Jota, all potentially options that are differentials to Mo Salah. You might even want to leave a spot open to buy the one you think that's most interesting in game week 2, perhaps. So why do people keep messaging me while I'm working? I would say that for me, the answer is just going to be Haaland, I'm afraid, mate. Home fixture at the Etihad, it's fine. It's not ideal because Newcastle won the strongest defensive, but that'll be it if it's no Mo Salah. Keith Hill, that's what we've done. Shri MC says TA or Manchester United pick one. Thanks, James. Depends, right? So there isn't a direct complete comparison, so I guess Trent and Fernandes would be the closest to. At that point, my instinct at this moment is I'd rather have Rashford for 0.5 more than Fernandes is my instinct personally. Comparing Trent with Mount doesn't feel right. Would I pick Trent over Fernandes? Probably yes. So that's the closest comparison. So the answer would be Trent, but 1 million more on Rashford. The thing is, he has to be combined, right? So you could be saying, right, Rashford and Botman or Trent and Stones, for example, right? We've got to maybe think of it that way and pair the two together. Francis Dogan says, who'll be Spurs' first choice right back? Porro looked good, and with Ange Ball, could he match Trippier? I kind of covered Francis. I'm gonna skip it. I think a lot will depend on how quickly Destiny Udogie settles in. So if he doesn't, then that probably increases Porro's chances, would be my instinct. But I'm pissing in the wind like everybody else at the moment. I don't have the answers, but I think I will do in a few weeks. Ramiz says, thoughts on Kluivert and Mbeumo? Kluivert's a really interesting price. I mean, Bournemouth's fixtures are rough at the start, so if you're looking for a 5.0, I think there are probably better options to start with than that, but certainly at that price bracket, one to keep an eye on. And Mbeumo's going to be really popular, isn't he? I think I probably prefer Mitoma, is my instinct. And that's partly because I'm a fixture head, so I'd look at Brighton's first 3, Luton at home, Wolves away, West Ham at home. I think, yeah, that's great. Whereas Brentford's aren't bad, and Brentford have got a 4th really good fixture as well. But it's probably slight favouritism on Mitoma, I would suggest. It seems to be a school of thought that Mbeumo's going to play right through the middle, and I don't think it's quite the case. Like, he played on the right when Brentford played at Tottenham in game week 37, so I think it's probably comparable to Mitoma. He'll almost definitely pick up the penalties, is worth saying, Mbeumo. But I've got a slight preference for Mitoma at this stage, but Mbeumo's going to be really popular, and I completely understand why he's not out of the running for me. Birth Media says, hi James, best signing of the window? That's a great question, and considering we covered it in detail yesterday, I should probably really know the answer to that. If we remove money, the answer is Declan Rice. I can't see it failing. It's a lot of money, but I can't see it failing. Pound for pound, I think Maddison's worth potentially being put in that conversation at the moment. Mahmoud Dahoud might be one to watch out for at Brighton in terms of slotting in as a new number 6. That's a free transfer, so that's, for pound, that's certainly one you put in consideration. But if we're removing the money, I think the answer honestly has to be Declan Rice. Dave Langford says, hi James, welcome back, thank you. Corjan 953 says, do you think Eze's been slept on at 6.5 price point compared to the Mitomas and Mbeumo's? I feel like he ended the season very well, and yes, he absolutely did. But in that end of the season last year, Crystal Palace had a very good run of fixtures that didn't include fixtures such as Arsenal, Brentford, Aston Villa and Manchester United, which Palace have all got in their first 7. And I think that's the difference, isn't it? Brighton and Brentford have got better fixtures as well. So I also think the injury to Michael Olise is not good for Eze. It probably makes it a little bit clearer. Sort of around about game week 31, there was quite a bit of debate, Eze versus Olise. With Olise out, Eze looks like the one at the moment, although I suspect Palace will add something to their squad. But Elise is an absorbing player in the sense that he will absorb players to him. So I think if it's just Eze in there at the moment without Elise and without Zaha, then people will be extremely conscious of him. So yeah, I think, to be honest with you, I think Mitoma and Brumo would be better choices as it stands. Chris Duckworth says, hi James, do you know anything about young Tom Bloxham who's joined Blackburn under 21s from Spurs? Sorry Chris, I can't blag that one, mate. I've not heard of the lad, so I can't give you a good answer on that, mate. Tottenham have a lot of forwards at underage level. There's a couple who rejoined the squad this summer. Troy Parrott might even be a name that gets minutes and gets properly looked at over the pre-season, I think. Dane Scarlett's been a regular for England under 19s, a return from a loan at Portsmouth. And there's some other kids lower down who are exciting attacking talents for Tottenham as well. That's not a name I'm familiar with, Chris, I must be honest. FPL Glasgow says, no question, just wanted to say great to have you guys back. Love the new transfer show. Cheers. I'm glad about that. Clayton might not be doing it with me next week because he's on holiday, so I don't know how we're going to make that work. Sean says, nice to have you back, James. I'm going to leave FPL for now, given the date. Quite rightly so, Sean's fine. 2 questions. 1, when is the first batch of Premier League TV picks going to drop? 2, Freds, is it going to be worth it? Good questions. So 1, TV fixtures. So the promise was that what they've said is there isn't set dates as there have been previously. So what they've committed to at the moment is they're going to give notice, 6 weeks notice is what they've said. And then I think in the latter part of the season, it's only going to be 5 weeks notice. That's what they've said. So 6 weeks from today, what's that? That's got to be around about game week 2, isn't it? So I'll be totally honest, I'd probably expect some sort of announcement today, hopefully. But they're good at cocking it up, aren't they? So imminently is what I'd suggest. But how big the batch is going to be, Sean, I'm not sure. You might literally just get the game week 2 fixtures and it might just roll, rather than in the past having these big clusters. So they removed their commitment to say by certain dates they'll announce the October fixtures, for example. That's removed. All they've promised is 6 weeks notice, which is shite, by the way. There'll be a lot of complaints about that from fan groups. But we're coming up to game week 2 deadline. When season start? August 11th. It's August 18th, August 19th. I mean, we were within 6 weeks, basically. We're just about there now. 6 weeks today, basically. So I think we should have something today, Sean, but I can't promise it. I have no intel on that. On Freds, is it going to be worth it? We've opened a Freds account, as I mentioned yesterday. So a lot of people are going over there. It looks like it needs a lot of work, but it seems an okay platform that people are moving to. So I think it's becoming clearer and clearer that Twitter's either got to sort themselves out or it's on its last legs, isn't it? So yeah, look, we've opened an account. I'm not pushing it too hard at the moment or anything, but yeah, the account's open. We'll have a look. It's new to everybody. Looks okay. It looks like a kind of basic concept, small watered down version of Twitter, but I'm sure they'll improve it with testing, etc. Benny Hughes says, what do you think of Dwight McNeil? What do I think of him? I think he had an amazing game when Everton won at Brighton back in, what was that, game week 35. I think he's not fulfilled the potential that many of us thought he did have when he first started playing for Burnley. I very much had a belief that his output would improve if he moved to the right, but I think he does appear still strongest as a natural hold the touchline winger rather than coming inside. I think he had an extremely poor period for Burnley towards the end of his spell there, where he looked a little bit lost and lost a lot of confidence, which is ironic because he's now working under Sean Dyche again, who seems to have lifted him again. So I think there's still potential of a player there who's still very, very young. If you're asking from a fantasy perspective, it's a strong no from me, mate. I'd rather go, if I had to go on one of them Everton midfielders, I'd punt the Corre at the start, to be honest. Janega77 says, hi James, which 2 teams who already were in the Premier League last year do you expect to have the biggest drop off and also increase in terms of league position? That's an interesting question. We'll have increase, we've got to say Chelsea, haven't we? Liverpool's potentially obviously in that bracket as well. I mean, West Ham will be better this year than what we saw. In terms of drop off, where did Everton finish? 17th. So, I mean, it could have a drop off. I think Wolves, and for no reason other than I'm struggling a little bit, I maybe say Fulham season 2 might find it a little bit more difficult, but I think they'll be fine. I don't particularly see them being in a relegation fight. Davey Fisher says, is Enciso a rotation risk? I think everybody at Brighton's a rotation risk. So there's a lot of assumption on people like Ferguson. It seems like people have forgotten that they spent 30 million on João Pedro. Got Danny Welbeck there as well. And Sissoko can obviously play one of those roles as well. So you've got 4 in that area. And Sissoko can also work wide, like a Mitoma or a March. You've got Buonanotte, who's going to be a little bit more experienced now as well. And we've got a month to go before the season starts, and they might add new players. So I think one of the things we particularly saw from De Zerbi towards the end of the season was more rotation. That was clear, because I think they struggled when they did have to play twice a week. And obviously being in Europa this season, that's going to happen more. Now, for the first 3 weeks of the season, it's probably not too much of a huge concern. Like, I wouldn't have concern about Mitoma starting against Luton opening day. In Sisso would be difficult to say. Difficult to say. If he played regularly, might turn out to be the best 5.5 in the game. But I would say, to answer your question, is he a rotation risk? The answer is yes. Son of Sam says, hi James, hope you're doing well. What is the chance of Trent not returning in the first few games and dropping in price because of the high ownership? That applies to every player, doesn't it? I mean, if all on blanks for the first 2, people will sell him. Honestly. And similar will apply to Trent. If he blanks against Chelsea and then say Liverpool beat Bournemouth but concede and he hasn't got an attacking return, then it's Newcastle and Villa the next 2, and there's other players at cheaper or firing. You can go down to a 5.5 defender and move an Mbeumo up to an 8.5 or a 9, for example. People will do it, won't they? So, but that applies to everybody. What's the chance of him not returning? Don't know. I mean, you'd expect him to return against Bournemouth in game week 2. So it's probably to not return at all, probably low. But it's certainly no guarantee that it will return in either. And that applies to everybody, right? It's a small sample period. Jeff says, hi James, I'm back in the FPL scene. Best wishes for a great season. Many congratulations on your continued Planet FPL success. How do you feel about Luton Town in the Premier League and any FPL assets? It's probably nothing there FPL wise at the moment. As I said, Cooley Woodrow 4.5 forward might be one who gets the odd minutes, but I suspect between now and the start of the season, probably a better option will show up in that position. So there probably isn't anything there. They do have a decent opening. Of the 3 promoted clubs, they've got the best set of fixtures. You could argue Luton up to game week 9 is pretty good, despite playing Brighton and Chelsea away inside the first 3. So it might be a watching brief. Then the window shuts just before game week 4, and they might have some new additions, and you could invest in them. Game week 4 to 9, for example. Then there's a real rough period, sort of game week 10 onwards, starts with a trip to Villa Park. There's nothing there at the moment. How do I feel about them being promoted? Not overly happy about it, just because I won't get a ticket. Would the away allocation be about 1,000? I won't get one, unfortunately. So I'd rather Coventry come up from that perspective. I went to uni at Luton, so I got a little bit of a soft spot for them. I think it's an amazing story, and very, very best luck to them. If they stay up, like, it'll be incredible. It'll be incredible. What's more important is they position themselves where they can, I don't want to say yo-yo club, but that's the best term I can think of at this moment in time, that they could have the potential to be that over the forthcoming years. They are not, what that football club went through with the financial difficulties through the noughties and the early teens, they are not going to put themselves in a position where they chase the dream really hard. That's not to say they're not going to buy players, but they are not going to go mad and crazy. They know what they are, and they accept it, and they're realistic about it. And it's not to say they'll definitely go down, because their style will give some teams some real problems. They'll go and press high. They'll be direct. I think they'll slow the game down at certain points and make it awkward, particularly in away games. They'll use Kenilworth Road as a bit of a weapon. I'm sure they'll have a home game where they beat a big club this year. So, I don't think I'm looking at them going, they're going to be a disaster or anything like that. It's going to be very difficult for them to stay up, but very best of luck to them. It's very similar to as when Bournemouth came up. Bournemouth are arguably the smallest club that's ever been in the Premier League, even still now. But they had a football team and a philosophy that was working. I remember Rob Edwards hasn't even been there that long himself, right? Took over the job from Nathan Jones in the winter. So it's going to be very, very difficult for them, but wish them well. I mean, if they stayed out, it'd be amazing. And talk of the devil, Owen Wilson says, what's your plan for Spurs away games this season? I'm surprised you can't get tickets for Bournemouth. I'd have thought there was a top tier of loyalty that you'd qualify for that would guarantee you tickets. No. Nearly all of them. So Bournemouth and Luton, I won't get a ticket. I will apply, irrespective, even if it's like a Monday night or a Friday night, I will apply. Very unlikely. Brentford are just about make it. So I don't go to every game, Owen, and there's people over the last 5 years have, right? So I am near the top of the loyalty list, right? I've been blessed to be in Amsterdam as the example, and you know, any big one I can essentially have at the moment. Some of these smaller grounds can be a little bit challenging, so no, it'd be very difficult to break into that pool, because there are a set of away fans that will go to every single game, and full credit to them. So, you know, when the fight is on for that Luton ticket or the Bournemouth ticket, they deserve it a little bit more than me. Like, I bottled April, right? I didn't go to St James's, I didn't go to Goodison, I didn't go to Anfield. Those guys who did and suffered those 3 games deserve that ticket more than I do. I can't question that. Andy Mack says, hi James, having now seen all the player prices, who do you see as locks in your team for game week 1? Haaland, and that's it. To be totally honest, I would be fairly open to everyone else, and even Haaland himself, if there's fitness doubts. I'd probably leave the money in the bank, by the way, if that was the case. I'd probably just start with Kane and leave 1.5 or 2 million in the bank. That would probably be my approach if that was the case. I couldn't say anyone for definite. Saka's probably next in line. But let's see the impact of the team with Havertz in it. Martinelli and Odegaard and Havertz himself obviously all offer great alternatives, and Gabriel Jesus similar price as well. So I mean, I could definitely foresee myself starting with 3 Arsenal forwards, to be totally honest. So Saka's probably next in line. I think Estupiñán is probably the third. Looking at that price with Brighton's first 3 games, looks really appealing. I want to say he hasn't scored yet for Brighton, but it really felt like it was coming at the end of last season. So I think there'd be the 3: Haaland, Saka, Estupiñán, who I'd be surprised if I started without. Otherwise, pretty open at the moment. I'd like to start with Treble City, and as just said, I think Treble Arsenal, certainly bits of Brighton. And I think I'm going to want something Manchester United as well, even if that's just Rashford, for example. I will probably go that way rather than a split of 8-9 teams, for example, I imagine. But yeah, Haaland's the only 100% lock. If he's fit, he's in. Andrew Jarvis says, hey James, great to have you back on Ask James. Hope you had a good break and looking forward to the season ahead. Thank you too, Jarvo. Owen says, well, Clayton is an excellent addition to the pod. Very knowledgeable and great speaker. He's really great, isn't he? He really does know his football. He's obviously done with Nima, who many will know through FPL Meets, his own podcast, the Arsenal Bite Size podcast. Extremely knowledgeable on modern football and how it's played. There's things that I can learn from him tactically as well, which is great. So yeah, really good addition. Don't compare him to Serge, just a completely different person, but he's part of our team. He's taken over our business development operations, and yeah, you'll see him on the pod sometimes, absolutely. So I don't know if he's going to do next Thursday's transfer show, because I said technically he's on holiday, but he'll do the 2 after, and you'll see more of Clayton throughout the season. But I'm glad to hear that. Feedback's good. I knew that anyway. Joey Kneecap says, just joined, so you might have talked about this already, but thoughts on Dominic Calvert-Lewin? Interesting at 6 million. First 4 fixtures are not bad. There's Luton and Bournemouth at home back-to-back in 7 and 8 as well. So at that price at 6 million, yeah, very, very, very interested. What I would say, though, is I think for me to start with him, I'd start with a front 3. I'm very conscious of that group of forwards at sort of 7.5, 7 million on one insane. And if you go with a Haaland, a Calvert-Lewin and a 4.5, for example, and say Nkunku's popping off and then Chelsea come into great fixtures and you've not started with him, there's a good chance you'd be thinking, shit, I wish I'd gone with that, for example. So if to have Calvert-Lewin, I think I'd probably start with 3 forwards in that case and go 3-4-3, which I wouldn't rule out, because I think with him, you want to see him fit in pre-season, right? You know, no chances taken. He's got to have a good pre-season, otherwise it's not a consideration. If he does, those fixtures are good enough that, yeah, absolutely I'd be tempted with him at 6 million. It's a big 2 million drop from last season, which arguably is warranted considering Everton's league position as well. But yeah, he would not be out the running for me at all. Sorry, I've missed one now. Jerry Dharma Yu says, hi James, with Son having a huge price drop to 9 and Maddison price at 7.5, who would you choose between the two, and who to pick between Stones and Gabriel, since both have good fixture runs until game week 8? Preference Stones, because there's a real direct alternative to Gabriel with Aaron Ramsdale at the same price, and possibly Zinchenko, but as Clayton's been saying to me, he's not sure Zinchenko is a certain starter for Arsenal this season. I should point that out. He thinks they may well invert from the other side, particularly once Julian Timbers joined permanently, which that's another imminent deal that Arsenal are doing. So Stones over Gabriel. On Son versus Maddison, that might even come down to, if I do want to start with players at different price points in midfield, that might even come down to Foden versus Rashford decides that. I want Phil Foden at 7.5 if he has a good pre-season. And if Marcus Rashford's fit, I think I want a piece of that as a really good captaincy alternative, perhaps for 1 or 3 as well. I can't see me doing it, but I think I'd rather have Rashford in place in case I need it for a captaincy perspective. So the more likely answer, to be honest, the most likely answer at the moment is neither. If I had to pick between them right now, Rashford versus Son and Foden versus Maddison, I'd pick the 2 non-Tottenham players as it stands currently until I see something. Son's position is going to be so important, and we can't be certain of it just yet. And what I mean by that is, yeah, sure, if Kane stays, he's going to play left wing, but it's how that moves within possession for Tottenham, that he might come into more of a almost attacking inverted position, if you will, coming into more of a 10 position, or is he going to be asked to hug the touchline? Now, if he's asked to hug the touchline, the answer is definitely Rashford. If he's coming into inside, we can get more into shooting positions or link with Kane and run through half space positions, then the answer might be Son. And until I see what Tottenham intend to, or whatever Postecoglou intends to do, I'm not sure I can answer that question properly for you. So if I had to answer that right now, it'd be the non-Tottenham players. Owen Wilson says, are you going to do any pods about player prices, i.e. best players under X price? Yep, Monday's podcast, the main podcast with myself and Suj, will be on player prices. So now we've got all the prices. That's the focus of Monday's podcast in its entirety, will be on player pricing. Ray Koreshi says, hi James, just wanted your thoughts on which trio you prefer, Trent, Foden, Jesus, or Rico Henry. I've read that as Thierry Henry. Mo Salah, DCL. It'd be the Trent option as it stands. Trent, Foden, Jesus. So Balaji says, hey James, nice seeing you. What's a hot take for next season in FPL and non-FPL? Mine is Brighton assets won't be worth it in FPL and Arsenal will finish below Tottenham this year. You need to let me have some of what you're smoking, mate, honestly. I feel like that's definitely the only time. I don't think there's a single Tottenham fan who would think Tottenham would finish above Arsenal this season, mate. Even the most optimistic and deluded Tottenham fan, I don't think would think that right now. I can't see that at all. Hot take. Hot take. Wolves might be my hot take at the moment, but I don't know if that's not as hot take as yours at all, in fairness. In terms of FPL, my hot take would be, and I think most of it would agree with this, what I don't like about the pricing is I think there are a number of teams who, bar the benching enabler, we just forget about here, really. We just completely forget about them, unless they are the 4.5 midfielder or the 4.0 defender. And I think even the closer we get to the season, we may even be forgetting about these guys. And I don't think that's the way the game should be. I think the game should open, and you can't always say everybody, because, listen, Dwight McNeil could have been priced at 5 million, for example, and I'd still be like, I'm not sure that I'm going there. Calvert-Lewin could have been 5.5, and I still wouldn't be convinced that I was going there for sure, right? But I think those sort of things, and Calvert-Lewin's very well priced, by the way, so that's a bad example. But I think, I look at Wolves, and I think, give me something there. Like, put Nelson Semedo at 4 million. Give me something that's going to make me really interested in them somehow, some way. Neto, same price as last year. No one wanted to get burnt by that, so no one's going there this year at 5.5, right? Give me something, and unfortunately, there's not a lot they could have done. It's more just a case that the pricing of others has priced many of these clubs out of it. That's probably my biggest, because I think the league is the Premier League, right? And okay, there's the Big Six and Newcastle and challengers like Villa, Brighton, etc. But these clubs need the other 10 or 11 clubs to be what they are in the league, etc. And I think it's fantasy Premier League. It's not fantasy pick your favourite players from the top 6 teams or top 8 teams, right? Even Villa, looking at Villa this year and going, I'm not sure really where I want to invest in that, to be totally honest. And that's, again, they had to put Ollie Watkins' price. But I think it's more the pricing of the most popular players is what prices these guys out the situation. You know, if the likes of Rashford, Son, Saka had all been in the 10.5 area, you probably bring someone like Ollie Watkins is probably maybe more interest at 8 million, if that makes sense. So I think the underpricing of the premium players rules out many players from other clubs. So listen, that's the game. That's the way they set it. We get on with it. It's what I say every year. The game and the challenges are different. This is how they've decided to do it this year. But I think my hot take would be it's a shame that we might as well forget half the teams in the league from a fantasy perspective. I don't think going into game week 1 that should be the case, personally. And I hope that opinion proves to be completely wrong and assets from Wolves, Fulham, Palace, Burnley, etc. all look amazing from game week 2, 3. I'd love nothing more than that. Atul says, also, if I'm not wrong, Clayton is from Goa in India. Well, I've said it out loud now, so I hope you're right. Dave Perrins, my friend Simple Goals in, says, hey mate, hope you had a good break. Sky is live. Oh, great. Didn't know that. I knew it was going live today. I did know most of the prices. And I'd love to see your live price reactions. Prices look great, aka hard, yes. With few grimes apart from Duncan Haaland. I think that's meant to be gripes apart. Can we hear your thoughts? Well, I haven't seen them. I haven't seen the defensive ones, but I did have a rumour maybe that Lewis Dunk might be cheaper than. It's why I mentioned it on Wednesday Sky Pod as well. Haaland, yeah, it was going to be what it was going to be. I'd seen most of the attacking player prices, so yeah, it looks really challenging, unlike the game that we're generally discussing here. But yeah, I look forward to that's the proper challenge, Dave. You know I'm well into Sky. And I intend to come back stronger this year. Daniel Cullerton says, is there any players that spring to mind at Spurs? I should just add there, for those who didn't hear it and want to play Sky Fantasy this year, we did an introduction podcast on Wednesday designed specifically for new players to introduce them to the game. And Sky, if you live in the UK or Ireland, is a fantastic game. I can't recommend enough that people play it. Generally, a first-time player can win the game. It's £50,000 to the winner. Daniel Cullerton says, is there any players that spring to mind that Spurs let go as a youth player, youngster that went on to great things? Good to have Planet FPL back, James. Unfortunately, whenever I get this question, the first player I always think about is Marcus Edwards. Not because he's gone and had a phenomenal career, he hasn't. He's at Sporting Lisbon at the moment. But the talent in that boy upsets me at least once every week. I think about it, how talented that boy is, and what he should have been for Tottenham. So that's probably the one. Once I start thinking of it, I can't really think about anything else. I'm going to have to skip that. Sorry. Mr. Dyer says, what do you think of the new FPL, new format FPL is going to be? I've no idea. Can I be honest with you? I don't really care. Once we see it, we'll see it. Who knows? Maybe it's going to be free hit every week. Maybe it's going to be some sort of draft system. Maybe it's going to be Planet FPL Extreme, which I suggested as we put everybody up by 1 million and make it a harder difficulty level of game. The difficulty of the game is hard because everybody's priced so attractively to people, if you will. FPL Creator says, hi James, hope you're well. Wondering what your early thoughts are on FPL assets that might go under the radar this season. I have a feeling like last season it could be Gross at Brighton again. I saw Gross has been picked up more than March, interestingly, so far. And I think that's probably just based on point scoring last year. Look, reality is he could end up playing right back regularly, particularly if Brighton buy another number 6. And then what is that? It's reality as it stands right now. So for me personally, definitely would buy Matoma rather than Gross at the start. And if we have things that linger in our mind, like, Gross scored twice game week 1 last season, stuff like that, where he's going to play is the most relevant thing. So if he's going to play as one of the 10s, blinding, absolutely blinding. But I suspect it would be a deeper position. So, I mean, just on that alone, it's a no for me personally. Joe Kneecap says, James, thoughts on DCO? I have covered. Thanks for the question. We're going to skip it. Andy Max says, do you think Maddison will hit the ground running? Do you think it makes Son a better option now? Again, I'm going to skip that, Andy, because I've done quite a few bits on Son and Maddison already, and I'm just going to go around in circles and say I can't answer that honestly until I truly see what Postecoglou's got planned. But my answer, do I think Maddison will hit the ground running? Yeah, sure, probably. I think the crowd will like him. FPLD says, hi James, do you think any of the top 6 clubs are particularly underpriced players in FPL this season? I guess it depends what we're describing as top six. I should also probably caveat that and say most of the players in the game, in my opinion, are underpriced, right? But I guess Chelsea shows up, doesn't it? There's players there, James, Chilwell, Sterling, and Nkunku, as I've already mentioned, maybe even Jackson, even to the likes of Wesley Fofana and Levi Colwill, who could all be really, really underpriced based on what Chelsea do or don't do this season. They could be this season's Arsenal from an FPL perspective in terms of, oh my God, like Martinelli's at 6 and stuff like that. So we know the capability of a Raheem Sterling, right? If it goes well for him at 7 million. So the Chelsea ones are the ones that spring to mind. LH says, James, hope you had a good break. Can you see Kulusevski as the 8 in Postecoglou's system will stay out wide? It's a good question. I think as it stands, it's probably less likely than likely because of the signing of Maddison. Whereas I think if Tottenham had not bought Maddison, I'd say to you, yes, I can definitely see that. Is he brave enough to play Maddison and Kulusevski in front of Basuma as an example? I'll be totally honest with you, he might be. he might be. He might just be, but it probably dictates if also does he think Amanda Solomon, if that deal goes through next week, or Brian Hill is going to be competitive enough to be a regular starter as well. So it's probably more likely no than yes at the moment. But he may also end up in one of those positions, which I explained in more detail on Talking Tactics today, where, for example, Tottenham might not want Porro to come inverted. They might say, just fly up the wing. And then Kulusevski might naturally come into one of those 8 positions. There's different ways he can do it. And sorry to be boring, but I can answer this a lot better for you in a couple of weeks. He also says 7.0 for Sterling is a joke, by the way, potential game breaker. Yeah, could be. Joey Kneecap says, surely McAllister is the best so far. Of signings, yeah, it's certainly up there. I mean, to be honest, Dominic Szoboszlai is an extremely talented player as well. May even prove to be a better one. So, yeah, McAllister's a shrewd signing for Liverpool. Had to get midfield reinforcements, we knew that. Trini Guna says, hi James, like you, I watch fixtures closely. Which teams have the best opening 5 weeks in your opinion? City, Arsenal, Brentford, Brighton. It's not going to be surprising. I think Everton is decent at the start. Probably not first 5. It was looking a little bit longer. I sort of say put Luton into that bracket as well. Those are the ones. I'm not going to tell you anything revolutionary about that, to be totally honest. United's are okay, considering you've got like Wolves and Nottingham Forest in there. Tottenham are good 3 to 5. But I think City, Arsenal, Brentford, Brighton, Everton are probably the ones for me, to be totally honest. Birth Media says, Operation Attack Wolves. No, not as yet, I don't think. But we need to keep an eye on their situation, I think. Kolala953, Collager, sorry, says, are there any rumoured transfers that you're currently thinking, if the move happens and they're at a price point that is fairer for whomever they are, you would be wanting in your squad? Yeah, look, I won't cover it again, because it's all hypothetical stuff, but I mentioned the Jed Spence example at the start. If he went to a Crystal Palace, very interested at 4.0, right? Trini's mentioning Balogun as another example. Keith Hill says, remember to like the stream, everyone. Yeah, it would probably be handy if I told people to like the stream as well. Andy Max says, thoughts on Enciso. Think he'll be a regular starter going forward now. Andy, I'm going to disappoint you again, because someone asked about Enciso near the start of the stream as well, so I am going to skip that, but thank you for the question, mate. I think in sense, for those who joined in late on the stream, yeah, I think a lot of Brighton assets are probably bigger rotation risk than we recognise at this moment. Notorious Nerd says, Bruno and Rashford double up with a plan to move off of one of them to a Spurs or Chelsea asset. A good strategy. It's reasonable. All I'd say with that is, when do you move? And all I mean by that is, if you're going to go like Rashford and Fernandes for 1 week, I wouldn't book in the transfer for that. I'd just go with the Tottenham or Chelsea asset you want. Because probably for both, the ideal time to go in is game week 3. And Manchester United have Nottingham Forest at home. So at that point, you're probably not selling your Manchester United asset. Now, game week 4, United go to Arsenal. But then from game week 5, depending on your view of Brighton, certainly they'll be open. We know that. That's a brilliant run for United from game week 5 to 9. So that's why I say 3. would be the time to invest in Tottenham, Chelsea, but that's also not the time to sell Manchester United either. So it can be done, of course it can, but largely it's probably a no for me, to be honest. Mr. G93 says the flip side of the price argument is if all the mid premiums were higher, everyone would have the same obvious premium, I feel, but do agree, miss looking for the real hidden gems. I think, look, it always, I say frustrates me harsh, but I see, people say, I saw someone saying the other day, we should have 4.0 forwards and 4.0 midfielders and stuff. What, to make it even easier to get these guys? Like, I'd arguably scrap 4.5 forwards and midfielders and say, right, 5 million, no 4.0 defenders. I'd arguably do it that way, for example. But then you'd be shoving everyone up, admittedly. So, look, I certainly recognise that when you're making a game for 7-8 million people or whatever, plus a lot of robots, you're never going to please everybody, and we always say it's about the game for the masses and making it as simplistic as possible. And from their point of view, I completely understand the way they do the game as they do. What I want is to sit there and, to be honest with you, I want the challenge. I want to sit there and tear my hair out and think, this is awful. Like, I really don't know which 5 million midfielder to get here. I don't want it to be horrible. And the format of the game just leads into people having their favourite players and stuff. That's all. But that's the way they've done it. We get on with it and we look forward to playing the game. Kanji FPL says Trenton and Mbeumo or Rashford and Stones. Probably Rashford and Stones for me. Would be my take at this moment in time. But yeah, to go back to one of the earlier questions we had, that's a rather than like a Trent versus a Man United, that's a perfect example of, look at it that sort of way. How do you want to do it? Yeah, I think for me it'd be Rashford and Stones at the moment. Tom Hornsey says thoughts on Maduaki, 5.5 and looks to have the right wing position locked. What makes you think he's got the right wing position locked? Because there aren't alternatives? I think there might be. I certainly wouldn't call him locked. Player with potential. I think hasn't shown me as yet that that's likely to turn into a big output of attacking returns. Very talented player. He's done a right for England under 21s during the summer, and I'm sure under someone like Pochettino will definitely develop. I certainly wouldn't say that he's got that position locked, however, not at all. He stood up more than others towards the end of the season. I think of that awful performance at Arsenal. He was the only player that really kind of stood up for himself that night. So I think it's probably a good personality about that kid. Paul Murray says, Ndombele or too scared to consider him? For FPL, no. There are rumours that Postecoglou really likes what he's seen so far, and you do reflect on him joining Tottenham, and the Pochettino had lost a lot of the players, which people forget, and that's when Ndombele joined the club. And since then, he's had Mourinho, Nuno Santo, and Conte, and 3 players who were never going to let him properly express. Mourinho briefly got something out of him as a 10. But Postecoglou literally might use him as a 6, and we could get in so much trouble defensively doing that. But it sounds exciting, and he may well be involved. Personally, I think Tottenham should cut their losses because of the salary he's on, and if they can get a decent fee for him, should sell him, would be my take. But he may be a surprise one who may get an opportunity. And yes, for those who do not know, yes, he is 4.5 in midfield. But I think I can't see him playing an 8 position, is what I'd say, Paul. Is way too much work's going to have to go into that, I think. So unless one of those fullbacks is allowed to really shove on, the 6 moves to one side and one of the 8s drops in, and that allows Maddison to come into more of a 10 position if it moves that way, maybe. But thing is as well, he barely gets to 60 minutes, Paul. So if he has a good 45, he'd be blown by 55. You spend if you'd had starting regularly, you'd be sweating by 60 minutes every week if he was going to make it or not. Brian says, hi James, I'm late to the live, but if you haven't covered it, what about Son at 9? Yeah, look, if Kane goes, then the most likely option is, rather than Tottenham buying a replacement forward, that Son or Richarlison will play through the middle. That's pretty much all I can say at this stage. I'm still more likely of the opinion slightly that Kane is more likely to stay than go. Notorious Nerd says James Maddison the best Spurs asset bar Kane. Kind of covered already, so I'm going to skip it, mate, but thank you for the question. Last one from Tom says, I'd argue that Sterling and Mudryk are competing for left wing. Of course, Sterling could play off the right. Madueke was our best player last few games, which could play a role. Him or Enciso for me. Yeah, if you're looking for 5.5, yeah, it's certainly worthy of consideration. I'll be honest, you're the first person I've seen mention it, but yeah, just to reiterate, I wouldn't see him as locked in as a guaranteed star. Certainly could easily be Sterling right and Mudryk left, couldn't it? Easily. And listen, now that the June 30th deadline's cut off, don't be surprised if Chelsea buy more players, by the way, and gamble. They may very well do so. Right. I'm going to try and close this stream, which, considering YouTube has completely crashed, I can't guarantee that I can even do. So, unfortunately, for those watching live, you might be watching me fumbling around for a couple of minutes. I've got nothing in front of me other than a frozen screen. But for the benefit of those on the audio, thanks for joining in. Give the show a review, etc. If you're on YouTube, smash a like, hit the sub button. Next week, as promised, Monday's podcast will be a detailed look at the pricing throughout the game in FPL. That's our main podcast next Monday. Be People's Poll Tuesday. Sky Fantasy reacting to obviously the unveiling of the price in that game as well on Wednesday. Next Thursday will be the transfer show, but I'm not sure who'll be guesting with me yet. And there'll be another Ask James for you next Friday. Our podcast all next week on Patreon, which you may have seen for those watching live going across the graphic towards the bottom of the screen, is a focus on what's happening in Saudi Arabia. 5 podcasts for our intermediate and advanced tier patrons based purely on what's happening in Saudi Arabia. So we'll be having a look at, why are they so disliked by many? Should we have a look at ourselves in episode 1? Episode 2 is going to be having a look at football in Saudi Arabia, both historically and currently. Episode 3 will be looking at the Public Investment Fund, which is obviously going to tie into Newcastle a little bit, maybe even a little Chelsea in there as well. 4 is going to have a look at the impact they're obviously having on the transfer window at the moment. And episode 5 will be asking, what's their goal? What are they actually trying to achieve? That's coming up for our patrons all next week as well. If you want to support the show, www.patreon.com/Planet FPL. But it just leaves me to say thanks everyone for the support. It's been a really enjoyable week to be back. And for the benefit of those on the audio, cue music, please, Manchild.